command by Allah when he said kun, fire kun. He called everything into existence, and that was part of that existence. That was part of how the evolution of the human being would take place because of that difference. We as Muslims, we coming at a time after the Injil and after the Torah and other religious communities had come alive with their way of looking at the same principle that Allah had revealed to them. But we can't make that same mistake. We can't make the mistake of those who had the knowledge that Allah had revealed to them by not seeing clearly what Allah had in their message. We have to see when Allah says He created man from one source, and He created, and from that He created cultures and languages. All of these things are designed to improve the man's ability to grow and develop in this creation. And it's very important that the Muslim, and especially the Muslims who had been students of Imam Waruddin Muhammad, we should have a clear understanding about that. We shouldn't be confused with that at all. We should not be confused to think when Allah says in the Quran He made everyone different, that doesn't mean that. That means exactly that. It means we all are unique, one from another. Now that gives us an advantage as human beings in the sense that we can make more progress. If the human being was one creature and progress could have been made and what Allah intends for the human being to make, and the progress could have been made with one creature, one creation, one creature, and we call that creature man, Allah would have created that. He says in the Quran, if He had willed, He could have created one individual, if He wanted to do that. But his creation is more than one. His creation is a multitude that comes from one. And we have to look at the advantage of that. We have to look at and learn from that. We have to learn from Allah's creation and see how that is such a clear picture to show us how, as human beings, as man, we have to evolve and evolve to the degree where we have a complete picture of who we are and what we are capable of doing. Now, most of the time, we think that we got this idea primarily from Christianity. We think that we need to have other people tell us how to understand the religion. When we was in Christianity, we thought that we had to have the European American to define religion for us. If what we did and what we thought about was not okay with them, we wouldn't do it. And then the European American made it a rule, made it a law that if the African American is going to preach Christianity, he has to preach Christianity according to the rules and regulations of the European American. And that would absolutely be against what Allah has intended in the Quran. He has intended in the Quran for man to understand the purpose of being different, the purpose of being unique. Understand that clearly, and then we can make progress. If we don't understand that as being a gift, a benefit to humanity, then we are looking at it like the racists use. The racists use that same idea and build up that difference and say, we are better than you. We are better than they. That's the racist mentality. That's a racist mentality trying to establish themselves as the top of the creation, as the top of man. You have some of the groups saying we are chosen people. Well, God chose us to be over all of the people. That's a racist mentality. That's not what Allah intended. Allah intended for man to recognize there's a difference in all of us, and that difference is for the benefit of all of us. You look at a simple situation, a hammer and a nail. A hammer and a nail are totally different when you look at them. If you look at a hammer, and I know some of the sisters may not do, but some do. I take that back, because there's some sisters know how to build things better than some men. But you look at a hammer and you look at a nail. You can't have two things so different, and what they are, but their purpose. They have the same goal and the same purpose to secure whatever they're going to be nailed to, whatever they're going to be hammered on, to secure that. And when they work together, they bring about the security of two pieces which is totally different than they are, two pieces of wood or two pieces of some other kind of material. And that hammer and nail come together in cooperation, and with some effort, energy behind the hammer coming from the human being, goes all the way with the hammer through, hit the nail, goes through the material, and they begin to build. That's what that difference represents. And when Allah says He's created us different, unique. And that's the same way Imam Muhammad explains that difference to us. We still get hung up in the old Christian mentality, thinking when we say difference, we think we are meaning what Shaitan meant when he said in the garden that he's different, that he's better than man. He's better than the human being. He's better than he really wasn't talking about the human being as separate from himself. He was talking about the part of the human being which causes the emotional impact in the human being to become a more of a viable part of the development of the human being, then it should be the leader of the whole total human being. I think most of our problem comes from when Imam Muhammad explained that to us. We weren't, we had not yet matured in the understanding he was giving us. Then when he said that man means mind, when he said man means mind, if we understood that and we could begin to evolve on that basic principle, then we could see the value of what Allah is talking about when he says that he created us different. He created us all different. And why? The emotion of the human being is a vital part of human growth. The intellect of the human being is a vital part of human growth. The moral development of the human being is a vital part of human growth. Those are the three main elements that make up this concept of the mind, this concept of the Khalifa. Those three main elements: the emotions, the intellect, and the moral development. That's the three particular things that Allah has in place for the growth and development of humanity. The emotions, which we call the jinn nature, Allah identifies emotions in the Quran as the jinn. And so does Prophet Muhammad in the Hadith identifies the jinn nature in the human being. The jinn nature is the driving force that, in absence of the morals, in absence of the intellect, the jinn nature operates. The jinn nature will move forward, even when the odds seem to be against success, against achieving. The jinn nature in the human being goes forward. This is what makes you want to achieve something. This is what this emotional aspect make you see things, or feel you see things, or believe you see things, to want to make you be successful when the odds may be against you. The odds may be against you, but that emotional aspect that I have the will to achieve, I want to achieve, I want to grow, I want to develop. That emotional aspect is what causes man to make progress, because the intellect can't make progress alone, because the intellect and the human being will run into a problem, will run into a stumbling block. At one time, the human being was thinking that the world was flat. See, with that kind of intellectual, where they thought they had the intellect on that, but they used the intellect to keep themselves from advancing. And this happened mainly in Europe. Mainly in Europe, we see an example of that. The European was afraid to go out into the ocean too far because he thought they would fall off the edge. He thought there was big monsters out there. That's the intellect. The intellect went as far as it can go in terms of thinking that it can sail. And they thought that the edge of the world was just the distance out into the distance. That was the intellect. So the intellect will stop. The intellect in the human being will stop and not make progress if it was on its own. If the intellect was on its own, the human being could not make progress based on just the intellect. And the moral aspect of the human being and the human development, morality alone, the human being could not make progress. Now that may not sound as though that's in human life, that it is in there and the human being have to appear and look at other aspects in order to make successful. The moral life will prevent the human being from making successful because it'll be bent on becoming so pure, so righteous in this existence that it will not let the intellect grow. And we've seen evidence of this in history, that people become so righteous in their behavior, and history shows this, that they will stop progress. They would call it anti-God if man would try to make progress. That's because they was on this moral level that would not make progress. It happened here in North America with the Native American. They had gotten to a point that their progress had ceased. Those are the vital aspects of the human being. And out of those three things, the morals, the intellect, and the emotion are the key components of the human being, of the mind. And those components, out of those three things, it is the emotions, the jinn nature, which has the power to step outside of the intellect, has the power to what the intellect thinks it cannot go anymore. The emotions can say, I believe we can go. I believe we can move. And when the morals say, well, this is not morally correct, this is morally incorrect, the emotions could override that. Now, why would Allah put that in the human being? This is the question that the angels ask. This is the question you find in the Quran. Ask Allah, when Allah told the angels and what he was creating, the angels asked the question, why would you create something that could bring bloodshed and trouble in the creation? And Allah says, I know what you know not. He was showing them that his knowledge, his not knowledge that like we have, but his creation is not full of mistakes that he had to keep correcting. His creation is one and is going to go correct, to go on the correct design that Allah has for it. No matter what the morals see, the moral life of the human being, of the life sees, no matter what the intellect sees, no matter what the emotion sees. Those three components, they can look at Allah's creation and not see what Allah has created. That's why Allah has to guide the human being. That's why Allah sends the human being revelation in the different books like Torah and Injil and definitely Quran, to guide the human being beyond the aspect of what they can see. And when the intellect goes as far as it can go, That's where man depends on belief. We have to then believe. We have to depend on belief. Allah created that in the human being, that there'd come a time where we will use our intellect, use our morals, and we will not be able to go any further. We just have to believe that we can succeed. We just have to believe that we can achieve. We just have to believe. And we just have to believe that there's a creator who created all of this, because we could not see the creator in our intellect, nor in our morals, nor in our emotions. But it's in the emotions that overrides both the morals and the intellect and says, I believe. That's in the story of Abraham. When you read the story of Abraham, how Abraham searched the sun, the moon, searched all the physical creation. That was telling us how the intellect operates. And as he tried, even when he was sacrificing his son on this, there was a moral level there that it stopped him. Said, no, no, no. This moral level that you have about sacrificing flesh does not reach the creator. So what Abraham is demonstrating, he's demonstrating there comes a time in the human being's life, whether it's moral, whether it's intellectual, he's going to have to count on that emotional aspect at which the belief comes out of. Beliefs are emotions. To believe in something is emotional. To believe you care for something is emotional. To believe you don't care for something is emotional. To believe you hate something is emotional. The belief system comes out of our emotion, which is the jinn nature that Allah explains in the Quran. And that's why in the garden, the jinn became arrogant, because the jinn saw how important the jinn is and was in the creation of human beings. The jinn saw himself as so important that the morals didn't count as much. The intellect didn't count as much. That the thing that counted more than anything was the emotions, was the jinn nature of the human being. That's what Iblis was talking about when he was in the garden saying to Allah, I am better than they. I am better than they, because they stop. They will stop. They can't go, they'll go to the point where they can't go any further. But I will keep going. I will go where they will stop. I will develop where they can't develop. That's what the jinn was talking about in that picture we got in the garden. When talking about the Garden of Eden. That gives us an understanding of that. That gives us the understanding of that picture, of that information. That is the human being that's talked about. It's the human being that is being explained. Is the mind. As Imam Muhammad says, man means mind. And in the mind are all those components, those three major elements. And so when we even make salat, and we a proper way of making the salat, you can make it alone. If you make it with someone else, there's a proper positioning. And then if you're making it with two or more people, there's a proper position. That one stands out front and lead the salat, and the other two stands on the side or in the back, toward the back, behind that one out front. Because those two standing on back, which one represents the intellect of the human being, and the other one represents the emotions of the human being. And they both follow the lead of the one that stands out front, which is symbolic to the morals in the human being. The moral in the human being, the human morals still have to lead both our emotional life and both our intellectual life has to be led by our moral life. And if man adopts that principle, then we wouldn't have all of the things that we see going on in the world. Is that what happens in the world? We see man does not develop the strength, the moral strength necessary to overcome and hold back the emotional desires, the emotional aspect, the temptations that come upon us, and the things that we desire in the material growth and development. And the morals hold that back. The morals hold back the intellect and say you can't just operate on people because you're trying to find out how to use the people, and they then serve as a experiment in your logic to bring about another kind of way, another cure for somebody in the future. This is the story of the Tuskegee experiment, how the European took hundreds of Africans and gave them syphilis, gave them the syphilis germ, and watched how it would affect them, how the syphilis germ would break down their bodies and how they could resist it so they can record it and have all of the information they need to help others in the future. That was their justification. This is going to go to future growth, they say, future life. That's the intellect talking. The intellect can explain how they can do something like eugenics, for example. They can explain that, say, well, this is going to help people in the future. This is going to help people that's not really here. And then when they come to be, we will have this medicine necessary that can cure them. That's the intellect talking. But the way Allah has established, He is saying that when you come up with ideas and concepts that can help others in the future, and it involves someone in this life, and you have to experiment on them or take their life for the justification for the other life, that you have to deal with on a moral level. The morality has to be the decision maker on that. The morality has to be the decision maker on whether the European can go into Madagascar and kill hundreds and millions of inhabitants just to take the land. The morals have to deal with whether or not the Europeans will come into America and give out to the Native American blankets as a sign of a gesture as friendship. And those blankets are filled with smallpox, knowing that the Native American didn't have a defense against smallpox, and millions of them died. The morals nature would have prevented that. If the European was listening to his morals, the European would not have done that, because the morals would not allow him to do that. But because they were listening more to their emotions, because they wanted to control the land and own the land because of all of the gold and everything that's in America, the resources, the raw materials, and all of that, and a place to live, because they was trying to get out of Europe and find a place that they can inhabit that was better than Europe. And they allowed that to supersede the morality that was in them. And they definitely had morality in them, because we see some of them, we got a lot of history to show that some of them were against some of the behavior that took place during that time. But there wasn't enough of them to prevent it. So we know it did exist. And that's how we have to be intelligent enough to look at what is going on in terms of a world that's changing, and how we can establish ourselves in that world that's changing, and what will be our lead. What would be our lead? What would lead us into this new world? And you hear sometimes you say, when you enter into the masjid, you should come on your right foot. That's also symbolic, talking about that whenever we do a thing, we should have the right intention, in terms of that. And the way we determine the right intention, we are following our moral judgment when it involves the lives and behavior of people. When we follow that moral and judgment, then we're talking about human excellence. That's what human excellence represents. Human excellence is talking about the human being capable of following their moral inclination to lead to a better life with their intellect, leading the way in terms of discovering things and developing things, and the emotions, the gen nature, having the power to motivate man to make progress, to motivate man to achieve great things. But that's the world that we are seeking to establish because of the impact that Imam Muhammad has had on our lives and the impact the Quran has had on our development and the impact that Allah had on our creation in terms of not just the creation of man, but the creation of the African, Valalian American here in America to be present and to evolve that thinking on this platform. The platform we have here in America is a platform that's on top of the world. And as we evolve here in America, as the African American or the African Valalian American people, we demonstrate how the human being governs himself as a human being. What is the human nature? And how that human nature should appear, how that human nature should evolve, and how that human nature should grow in society, in the society of man, in the culture of man. It is us who have the answers to that we have been given the answers to that. Now that's the first part of what Allah has for us in terms of Islam, the African American people getting and understanding the Quran and the use of the Quran. That's the most important aspect. And it's the first aspect, but it's not the only aspect. The second aspect, and most important for the human being and for the African, Valalian American, is that we, as Imam Muhammad said many times, as we develop and create within us a cultural identity, develop our uniqueness, and allow that uniqueness to be what explains the evolving and developing of the human being. This is the basic process on which we, as the African Valalian American, that we have and that we are not just responsible for, but we can exemplify. In other words, we can show as an example, as our lives continue to evolve, we'll become more of an example of that concept of the moral life leading both the emotional life and the intellectual life of man. We become more of an example of that, but we have to establish our cultural life, because when our ancestors was brought to America, either some came on their own but the majority were brought as slaves. And in that process, the cultures they had as a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or whatever tribe they came from was wiped from their memory. And they only was able to hold on just a little bit. The majority was right from the memory. And in that little, Allah made it possible for them to recreate, not recreate, but to create a new culture. Because the old culture was finished and we wasn't bringing that back. This is not what we are here doing and developing in America is not a new resurrection of the Nigerian culture or the Moorish culture or any of the cultures that came before. It's a creation of a new culture, a new culture created a new reality. This is what we are doing in America and the impact we should have on the world as the people that Allah has raised and created in America for that purpose. You've read many of the books that talked about a people who would be in a strange land, be in that land for 400 years, and they would be slaves of that land to the people of that land. And also in that same type of prophecies, in that the books that explain those prophecies, it also said those same people would be raised to become, some say governors, controllers, rulers. They even use those terms in the land. And the story that you see that shows that best is the story about one in the Bible and in Quran about Yusuf. That story talks about how Joseph was went into the big country, and use Egypt as that example, and then he was put into prison because the wife of the governor, one of the leaders, the governor, accused him of touching her or saying something to her, when actually nothing happened on Joseph's part. Joseph was innocent. And the evidence showed that his shirt, as the scripture says, was torn from the back, meaning he was trying to get out of there. And the governor's wife grabbed that shirt and tore it. But still, he had to spend time in prison. And he spent those years in prison, growing and developing his mind, his spiritual nature. So when he came out of prison, he wasn't the same spiritual sense, spirituality. He wasn't the same as the one who went in, although his basic makeup was the same, but he had been in contact with other people of that generation who were, some were of criminal minds and some weren't criminal minds. But it was those elements that told the king of Egypt about Joseph, that he was a man who could see visions. He was a man who could explain visions. He could explain your dream, those type of things. And so Joseph was brought into the king's presence because the king was having a problem. The Pharaoh was having a problem. And he had a dream and he wanted to know what it meant. And no one could tell him. And then someone said there's a person that can do that. And the name pointed out Joseph as the one that could do that. And Joseph came in the king's presence, answered the question, and explained to him what it meant. And because of that, the king followed Joseph's advice. And they were saved from famine because Joseph told them how they can avoid the famine. That's the position you see in the African, Bilalian American. We're in that position of Joseph. We're in that realm of Joseph. The America the kings of the world can't see themselves out of the problem they're in. The only solution they're coming to is war, because they don't have the answers that's going to bring the family of man together enough that they can live in cooperation with one another. But the idea and concept of human excellence is a concept that can change the way many of the rulers of the world see themselves in the world. And it can aid them in moving more into a process of what the Quran calls a shura bainahum, the process of coming together and working with one another to come to a conclusion or come to a solution that would help in the development of man. This is what you and I are bringing and developing for the growth and development of humanity. And it begins with us. It begins with us. And we have to look at that process, because we have been, some will say, not necessarily dehumanized, but we have been brought down to a low level in terms of when they created the slave. And the European American, or European at that time, and then European American later, created the slave, and they created a slave mentality. That the slave served in a situation where it was a slave master relationship. And that's what most of us are part of today. Most of us are part of a culture that's evolved everything in that culture to serve the culture. Even subordinate cultures within that culture are designed to serve the culture. When you go to the education system, that education system is designed to get you to serve that culture. If you develop something on your own, that culture is designed how to take what you come up with and put it into something of their use. And they, in many cases, would not give you credit for it. And in some cases, they would give you some reward, but not the kind of reward that that particular development caused in terms of the effect of it in the greater society. This is another part in history that many of us can just look in history and see how many inventions that the African, Bilalian American created in America. And many of them we've gotten no credit for. But yet the European was able to use them to advance his culture. Creations, from music to science, even our social behavior, food, everything. The European now is recognizing that the African Bilalian American has come up with this uniqueness, have been created with this uniqueness that they are beginning to copy, outright copy. There was subliminally in the past, they was copying us and we didn't realize it. But now, in this present, they are copying outright. They copy the way we walk. They copy the way we talk. They copy the way we dance. They copy the way we do everything. And they're trying to even get the genetic aspect that causes the human being to be a little, we say a little more assertive in their behavior when it comes down to physical development and physical impact and achievements. They're trying to get that edge also. This is why they have they have a great campaign going on in America and the world, but America, we are more conscious of it here. But in the world, they are trying to eliminate the African's presence in the world to the degree where it doesn't have any effect on developing the powers, the rules and regulations. And the way they're doing that, they're doing it with outright killing off the populations. And then in one way that is obvious is by integration and marriages. Integration, getting the European American to marry or to have children with the African American. And they've done that. They've been doing that particular process a while because men, European American men, are always, since we've been here, taking advantage of the African American woman. But now they have a campaign, and you can see it all on your social media, a campaign on trying to get the African American male to become part and married to the European American female and have children. And if each generation that they have children like that, the first generation, you can see it's an obvious mixture. The African is not as present, the European is not as present, and that first development is a mixture. That second generation, if encouraged to marry within the European families, then that generation, the African and the physical appearance, outer appearance, would begin to disappear. And if that's done another generation, that generation, then all the outer appearance of the African people would be gone, the physical appearance. It'd be more Caucasian in its appearance, or more European, depending upon what European family it becomes part of, a German or Irish. All of them have their own unique looks. They're different too. They're not the same. All Europeans don't look the same. They are different. Just like all Africans don't look the same. You have Watusis, you have pigments, you have all different throughout the world. And Switzerland, up in that area, you have European a European race whose average height is 6'8". They're the tallest people in the world. In Europe, in that area up by Switzerland, then you have different Europeans throughout Europe. But they are not interested in that because that's the way they have always been. That has not changed. Neither has the African change. The Nigerians, the Ghanese, all the different people, they still who they were. And the only group that's new on this planet that this will affect to the degree where they will become extinct is the African Balali American here in America, because we don't have a replacement. We don't have a replacement. The Europeans here, if they're Irish, they can have more Irish people come to America and be Irish American. We can't do that. The African American can't have a Nigerian to come into America and say he's African American, because his experience is different. His melanin tone may be the same, may even look similar, but he didn't experience the process that the African experienced during slavery and during the development, the evolutionary part, and biological part. Because remember, during that particular time, the European American, they, what we would call selective bred, they was breeding the slaves. They were breeding the slaves after the slave trade was abolished in 1807. They started breeding the slaves because they still needed slaves in America. The slave population tripled during that particular time. So we can almost guarantee that many Africans were affected by that breeding of the slaves. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing for African Americans. It was a good thing for the European American because now they didn't have to pay for slaves to being brought from another country into America and raise those slaves. They didn't have to pay for that. But they got slaves. And those slaves were valuable to the European. And they would ship them down to Louisiana because that was their, and once they started the slave trade, that was their point of destination, where they were destination within. From that point, they would send them into other parts of the America. They needed slaves. They had what they call short cotton was being grown. They needed slave labor. So that breeding of slaves was very profitable for them. They were able to save the money that it would cost them to have a slave come over from Africa, or be brought over from Africa and brought to America. They would save that money, although they would lose the immediate use of a slave. If a person is brought over from Africa and he's 15 years old or 12 years old, he could be put to work immediately when he gets here. But if a slave, during the breeding process, if a woman has a child, that child has to grow 3-4 years. Then 4 more years before getting to 8 years old, 9 years old. But when you weigh the number of slaves that was breeded in comparison to the number of slaves that was brought over, when they stopped bringing them over here to North America, but they're still bringing them over in South America, especially Brazil. The number of slaves brought over still didn't outweigh the amount of impact that slave breeding had on the growth and development of the European Americans' economy in North America. The economy was affected many, many ways, positive ways for the European. And not only was the economy affected, the fact that they could produce a people who were stronger and some say smarter than their parents, the previous generation. That each generation improves upon the last generation. That's what breeding is all about. You've heard about the pit bull and the different animals that Clydesdale, the horse called the Clydesdale, that you see the Budweiser. Many of you might not remember the Budweiser, but the Budweiser presentation, those horses that was pulling the Budweiser's wagon were Clydesdale with the long hair and the beautiful hoofs. They would grow and develop big, strong. They were breeded. They were breeded from the mare, a Flemish mare with a stallion, and that breed produced that horse. Then that horse could breed amongst itself. Once they got so many of them going, they became a line. They own stuff. They breed themselves. And that's what happened with the African American. That's a part they don't like to talk about much, because you're going to start asking questions like, is that why we run faster? Is that why we jump higher? Or is that why we dance better? Is that why we play music better? Is that why we catch on to things quicker? Is that why we developed the scientists that we have? Is that why they was able to use the African American genes, such as in Henrietta Lacks gene, that they use to cure cancer? All over the world, they use her gene, African American cancer cell. They were able to cure many, many diseases just by the use of that particular cell. And those are concepts and ideas that are out there that the European doesn't like to talk about, because they would set up the African American people to become more enthusiastic about marrying amongst each other, about building stronger families. Our concept of building families will then get a what we would call a great aspect of enlightenment that comes along with the physical development, spirituality. All of this would gain with the African American people taking advantage of the fact that the European American breeding did selective breeding on our people, our ancestors, and that produced a better African American that can build better families, that can build better science, that can build anything that anything that causes competitiveness in the society. Then the African American would be competition. And the European American understands that simple process. So the idea of having African Americans to build a better family is not a European concept in terms of how to make America better. They believe that to make America better, you have to break down the African American family. They came up with these laws in the 60s, laws that and 70s, to tell the African American woman that if she didn't have a man in her house, they would give her money to raise her children and give her a place to stay. They did that under these plans they had. Planned Parenthood, all those plans was designed to break down the family of the African American people. So when we as Muslims are looking for the solution to how we make better families and better husbands and better wives, we have to look at the cause and effect. If we don't understand the cause and effect, we could never really work our way out of the situation we're in. We can't continue to think that, oh, the Quran says thus and such, so therefore the woman should do this and the man should do that. And then we look at the example of the European or immigrant population as an example of how to follow those particular goals and objectives. Some of us will be able to follow them to a degree, but the way those ideas of familyhood are developed is by developing those family ideas within the culture of the people. The people have to understand the culture in which they have evolved to teach that culture to those who are coming into life. And that teaching, that training, that development will bring about a concept of stronger families. And if we don't start at the base, we have to start at the base. We have to start at the beginning. And if we don't understand that we have to start at the beginning, then we will never be able to build a family structure of value, a family structure that's going to preserve the African American people. Only way that we can do that is to begin to understand history. It is critical that we begin to understand history. That the only way that history can be used is to have this understanding of it and how we can use it to our benefit. That's the only way we can free our thinking, free our minds. We can't free our minds just saying, well, we should do this. Well, a man should treat a woman better, a woman should treat a man better. We still be going around in circles because we haven't solidified the thinking on how families evolve and why they evolve. And once we get into that thinking, then we can recognize that they evolve because of the culture. Then we begin to look at developing our culture as Imam Muhammad said, don't forget your culture. Once we're able to do that, then we can begin to circle around this idea of family. But if we still don't see we have a culture, and the children don't see they have the culture, young adults don't see they have a culture, if they think it's just dancing and food, we will never be able to convince them of anything of value that was solidified in their minds and concepts about how they can build families. The idea of how to build families come from the culture itself. You look across the world, you look at each culture, the Chinese cultures, the Japanese cultures, the African cultures, all of them have a way of life that they use to set the framework for their future. Their future generations the framework for the future generations are set within the culture. And then they live that out. Sometimes they get off and go a different direction, but then when they see how bad that some way is, they come right back to that particular framework they have for the culture. Look at what happened in China, in Japan, and other countries throughout the world when this civilization came up with the idea of having less children, mean that they can have more to share amongst themselves, and there would be more food to go around, and they convinced the world that it was being overpopulated, so therefore they had to cut down on having children. Well, the European countries bought into that thinking too, you know. The Chinese bought into that thinking. The Japanese bought into that thinking when that came out. And at one time, the Chinese were paying people not to have children. And then about 3 years ago, they began to realize that that meant that their populations were going to age out. They see what age out means is that they're going to have a greater senior population than they would have a population to replace the senior population. That the percentage will be cutting back. They recognized that the policies that they were bringing in, the European was bringing in about having just 1 or 2 children, they recognized that policy as being not good for their culture. So they had the culture to fall back on because they've been out there for thousands of years now. The Chinese is not a new kid on the block. They had empires within China that kind of rise and fall. And those empires were based on their culture. So they were able to fall back on their culture, and then they are back in the flow of producing more children. They're now paying women to have children. They're setting up the environment for children. And you look, and when you go to Japan, you see the same thing. Japan was in much worse shape than China at this aspect of aging out. But the culture was able to save them. Now you would look at the development of Japan. They have everything focused on the child, focused on the families coming together, making children. And they are able to do that because they have a culture. And even Europeans now are reversing their thinking about having less children. And if you notice the commercials here in America, you notice the commercials now are having more children in those commercials. You don't see the commercial with just a man and a woman and a child, maybe a child. No, you see commercial with a man and a woman and 3 or 4 children, especially if it's a commercial with the participants are European American. Mixed families, you see that a lot because that also aids the development of the European concepts and ideas. And main reason that does is because the European knows that the Europeans, European Americans, they have a culture. And they know that the African American still is running around trying to find out what their culture is. And we're trying to solve this family problem. We're trying to solve this marital problem. We're trying to solve problems that we don't have the solution for, because the solution for those kinds of problems are found within the culture in which you are part of, you are raised in. And right now, at this particular point, we are living in a dominant culture called the European American, a dominant culture which produces the thinking and development of the people within that culture, which includes the African Valalian American. Until we're able to break free, until we're able to break free of that thinking within that culture of the European American, and we break free, then we have an opportunity to grow and develop in the terms of what is for the African American people. And that's so important. It's so valuable that we begin to understand that and why that understanding is necessary. We're going to bring our talk to a close. And if we don't have any questions or comments, we're going to give the host an opportunity to bring on her aspects necessary. But this is the basis of how we can build and develop our family. And we have to do a lot of work as African American people. We have to do a lot of work in terms of developing our culture. And our culture begins back when we were brought to America and we developed a language. And the language we developed was called the Geechee language. And it's being taught all over America now in the universities. But it's still not, we still don't, as African Americans, don't really gravitate to it because we don't understand the importance of it. And our first known development was the Gullah Geechee. That's what we were known by back in the 1600s as a people. That was unique, and unique people that set us aside from all other people on the planet. And over the time, we grew into the African American, after we won our freedom from Great Britain. And that's the time in 1783 when we declared that we were African American. Like the European declared they were European Americans, and the Native American declared that they were Native Americans. We declared that we were African American at that time. And of course, those of us who know of the teachings of Imam Muhammad, the Imam Muhammad told mentioned that it was very important that we try to solve that problem of a cultural identity, and it could be best solved by the use of the term Balalian as our identification. So when we look at the growth and development of our people coming from the Gullah Geechee thinking up to the African American and to include the Balalian, now we're looking at the presence of a new community, a new culture, a new thought, and a new beginning in the African Balalian American. And once we're able to look at the importance of that and develop that, then we can begin to make this culture to be what cultures are designed to be the incubator for human life, social life, that is, the part of the human being in terms of social. Biological, we just follow the dictate of the genetic complexity and within the human life. But our social life is the culture shapes it, and we have to take that into advantage. So we're gonna sign off, and may Allah continue to bless you all. And and we'll talk with you another time, and perhaps you have some questions. Those of you, if you have some questions of the listeners, if you have some questions, put them in the chat, or you could get them to the host. Um, okay, this is me, Shahid Abdullah. I'm going to have to sign off. I have to get to my other appointment. Um, but it's about 9:30 now. So I will talk with you when you get through. Um, greet you. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to sign off with Allah's name, the most merciful benefactor, most merciful redeemer. All praise is due to Allah. We praise him and we thank him. And we ask forgiveness of him. And I greet you all in the greetings of peace of Assalamu alaikum.